Foreword. In his own Foreword to Morgoth's Ring, Volume 10 of the History of Middle-earth, Christopher Tolkien writes of his father that, at the end of the 1950s, and following the publication of The Lord of the Rings, meditating long on the world that he had brought into being and was now in part unveiled, he had become absorbed in analytic speculation concerning its underlying postulates. Before he could prepare a new and final Silmarillion, he must satisfy the requirements of a coherent theological and metaphysical system, rendered now more complex in its presentation by the supposition of obscure and conflicting elements in its roots and its tradition. Among the chief structural conceptions of the mythology that he pondered in those years were the myth of light, the nature of Aman, the immortality and death of the elves, the mode of their reincarnation, the fall of man, and the length of their early history, the origin of the orcs, and above all, the power and significance of Melkor Morgoth, which was enlarged to become the ground and source of the corruption of Arda. Christopher published a sizable selection of, and from Tolkien's long meditation on a sub-created world in Morgoth's Ring and the subsequent 2 volumes of the History of Middle-earth, but by no means all. The texts in this volume constitute a significant part and fuller record of his analytic speculation concerning its underlying postulates. They comprise the writings about Middle-earth and Aman that are of a primarily philosophic or speculative nature, that were not included in the latter volumes of the History of Middle-earth, as well as those of a descriptive and or historical nature, chiefly concerning the lands and peoples of Numenor and Middle-earth that were not included in Unfinished Tales. These texts in this book are very much of a piece with significant portions of the aforementioned volumes and will be of greatest interest to those who take particular interest in them. Like The Lord of the Rings, this book has been long in the making. I have, in a sense, been working on this book, though for long I had no awareness or notion that I was doing so for nearly 25 years. In 1997, in my capacity as one of the authorized editors of his father's linguistic papers, I received from Christopher Tolkien a bundle of photocopies of various manuscript and typescript materials, which he referred to collectively as late philological essays. As this designation rightly implies, all of the materials in this bundle are concerned to some degree with linguistic matters, but as is often the case in Tolkien's post-Lord of the Rings non-narrative writings, the linguistic matters that occasion each essay led Tolkien into long seeming digressions, either because they explain the historical, cultural, mythological, and or metaphysical situations that various words and phrases reflect, or simply because Tolkien wished to pursue some idea or point that occurred to him at that time. I edited and published 3 essays from this bundle in the journal Vanyar Tengwar, first Osamwe Kenta, a far-ranging essay on thought communication in VT39 in July 1998, Notes on Ore, a consideration of the inner learning and advising faculty of incarnates in VT41 in July 2000, and The Rivers and Beacon Hills of Gondor, a lengthy discussion of the names and characteristics of those geographic features in VT42 in July 2001. Christopher had, in fact, prepared an edition of the latter text for inclusion in The Peoples of Middle-earth, but it was cut for lack of space. A 4th long essay from this bundle, supplemented with related materials found in Tolkien's linguistic papers, was edited by Patrick Wynne and published in 3 parts as Eldarin, Hands, Fingers, and Numerals in VT 46 to 49 from February 2005 to June 2007. The first 3 texts are published here as chapters 9 and 10 of Part 2 and Chapter 22 of Part 3, respectively. The 4th, in considerably reduced form, is published as Chapter 3 of Part 2. Following the publication of my editions of Osamwe Kenta and The Rivers and Beacon Hills of Gondor, and knowing of my great interest in these and similar philosophical, historical, and descriptive writings by Tolkien, even apart from their linguistic elements, Christopher asked me to assist French scholar Michael Deveau in preparing an edition of the mostly unpublished materials concerning Elvish reincarnation that Christopher alludes to in several places in both Morgoth's Ring and the Peoples of Middle-earth, and which he had sent to Deveau. This edition together with DeVos' French translation and commentary, was eventually published in the journal La Fille de la Campagne, Volume 3 in 2014. These writings in my own edition are published here as Chapter 15 of Part 2 and Chapter 15 of Part 3. This interest also explains why, beginning in the late summer of 2008, Christopher began sending me successive batches of photocopies of a large bundle of late, chiefly manuscript writings, which had been collected together under the title Time and Aging, for my consideration and thoughts on their possible disposition. As will be seen, many of these writings are quite unlike the vast bulk of Tolkien's writings, featuring the inter alia long tables and calculations regarding the maturation rate and population growth of the Eldar from the time of their awakening to the time of the Great March and through their arrival in Beleriand and beyond. Despite this technical and undeniably dry accounting, they nonetheless contain many interesting details of historical and cultural significance, e.g., the fact that Tolkien considered having not only the Bala Orome instruct and guard the elves like Cuivianen, but also the Maya, Melian, and those of her fellow Maiar that would later, in incarnate form, come again to Middle-earth in the Third Age as the Astari, the 5 wizards that were sent by the Valar to encourage resistance to Sauron. These materials as a whole also exemplify not only Tolkien's unsuspected, at least by me, mathematical skills and precision in a time well before electronic calculators became affordable, but also his great concern for coherence and verisimilitude as seen throughout his later writings. After long study and pondering of the time and aging materials and thinking of the writings in the late philological essays, both published and unpublished, and further of certain likewise philosophical and cultural passages, again both published and unpublished, in Tolkien's linguistic papers, similarly arising from etymological considerations, e.g. the essay I had edited and published as Fate and Free Will in Tolkien Studies 6 in 2009, Chapter 11 of Part 2, and a long discussion of the nature of spirits according to Elvish thought that was edited and published by Christopher Gilson in issue 17 of his journal Parma Eldalambron in 2007, see Chapter 13 of Part 2, I began to discern how all this material might be organized together into a coherent book. This would allow me not only to publish such a substantial amount of material which could not be accommodated in a journal, but also to bring it all to the wider audience I feel it deserves. Having come to this conclusion, I quickly chose to call this projected book The Nature of Middle-earth, as succinctly unifying these materials under the two main senses of the word nature, both the visible and sensible phenomena of the physical world, including its lands, flora, and fauna, and the metaphysical, innate, and essential qualities and character of the world and its inhabitants. This book is divided into 3 broad categorical parts. Part 1, Time and Aging, is almost entirely composed of materials from the collection of the same name described above, though it is here and there supplemented with material from Tolkien's linguistic papers. Part 2, Body, Mind, and Spirit, and Part 3, The World, Its Lands, and Its Inhabitants, are composed of materials from 3 chief sources. A. The bundle of late philological essays sent to me in 1997, B. Material drawn from Tolkien's linguistic papers, and C. Particularly in Part 3, material collected by me over the years from the 2 principal archives of Tolkien manuscripts at the Bodleian in Oxford and at Marquette University in Milwaukee. I have re-edited those materials that have been previously published in specialist journals to make them more accessible to a general audience, chiefly by removing or minimizing passages and commentary that are principally concerned with linguistic details. There is, of course, inevitably some overlap within particular texts among these 3 broad categories, but the distribution of texts among them and the ordering of texts within each part are what seem most sensible to me. It is a pleasure to gratefully acknowledge the assistance of many people in the compilation and completion of this book: Catherine McElwain, the Tolkien archivist at the Bodleian Libraries in Oxford, and William Fliss, archivist of the Special Collections and University Archives at the Raynor Memorial Libraries of Marquette University in Milwaukee, have been extremely helpful and enthusiastic supporters of this book. I am also extremely grateful to Kathleen Blackburn and all the Tolkien estate, and to Chris Smith, Tolkien editor for HarperCollins, for making publication of this book possible. I am, like all Tolkien scholars and researchers, indebted to Wayne Hammond and Christina Skull for their exacting and exhaustive research and reference works, in particular the indispensable 3-volume JRR Tolkien Companion and Guide. I was fortunate to be able to avail myself of John Garth's extensive knowledge of Tolkien's military experience and his thoughtful assistance in locating certain texts in the Bodleian archives, in particular the Numenorean material in this book. Arden Smith and Charles Note have both applied their formidable proofreading and fact-checking skills to the text, though of course any errors that remain are due solely to me. I am also grateful for the support, friendship, and encouragement of numerous Tolkien scholars and friends from around the world who have heard me read from some of the materials in this book over the years, including David Bratman, Marjorie Burns, Michelle Markey Butler, Janice Coulter, Chip Crane, Jason Fisher, Matt Fisher, Verlin Flieger, Christopher Gilson, Melody Green, Peter Gribalskas, Wayne Hammond, Yoko Hemi, Gary Hunwell, John Ratliff, Christina Skull, Eleanor Simpson, Arden Smith, Vala Stephen Whitwer, Paul Thomas, Patrick Wynn, and the late much-missed Vaughn Howland and Richard West. Finally, my greatest gratitude is, of course, to Christopher Tolkien, who directly supplied me with most of the materials that have gone into this book and supported my idea to publish them in this manner. He was able to see and approve my book proposal with a representative selection of my treatment and presentation of the text and my plan for the book as a whole in the year before his passing. I am above all thankful for the kindness, encouragement, and sympathy he expressed to me in the course of our decades-long correspondence. I had the great good fortune to count him as a friend, and I dedicate this book to his memory. Editorial Practices. In order to make these texts as readable as possible with minimal editorial intrusion, I have often silently expanded abbreviations where their meaning is in no doubt, supplied punctuation, conjunctions, and other minor connecting words where Tolkien, writing in greater haste, has omitted them, and regularized capitalization and other spelling conventions where such alterations are insignificant to the text or its meaning. I have, however, tended not to regularize spelling or save where necessary for clarity, supplied punctuation, or other additions to text cited in the editorial notes. I have also made no attempt to either note or record where Tolkien has both made and subsequently corrected a mathematical error, with the exception of more or less brief introductions describing the manuscript or typescript of each text and providing a date as nearly as possible, and other relevant context, all editorial commentary chiefly detailing authorial and or editorial alterations of any significance, citing significant differences among variant versions of a text, and cross-references to Tolkien's other writings, has been placed in numbered endnotes to each text or group of related texts, and need not be consulted by those not interested in such textual matters. Where editorial comments must be made within Tolkien's own text, they are distinguished as such by being set in a smaller type and indented from the textual margins. Tolkien is inconsistent throughout in his use of single quotes, inverted commas, and double quotes. I have adopted the practice of using double quotes for all quotations and phrases except for quotes and phrases within quotes for which single quotes are used, and single quotes for all glosses, actual or apparent, e.g., Feya, spirit, Heroa, body. Wherever practicable, I have given Tolkien's own footnotes, interpolated notes frequent in his later writings as footnotes on the page of the notes referent. Where it is necessary to provide editorial endnotes to these footnotes, which my text editor does not permit, I place the endnote mark in square brackets next to the footnote mark, e.g. *1, and indicate in the endnote upon which word or passage or matter in the footnote I am commenting. I have supplied a brief discussion of various metaphysical and theological concepts and themes encountered in these texts as Appendix 1, linked to key points of relevance in the text. A glossary and index of forms from Tolkien's invented languages that are important to clarifying the meaning of various not specifically linguistic passages encountered in the text in this book and that can be used for further topical cross-referencing are included in the editorial glossary and index of Quenya terms as Appendix 2. Familiarity with at least the Silmarillion as published in 1977 is assumed. Ready access to unfinished tales in volumes 10 to 12 of the history of Middle-earth will further aid in understanding the text included here.